And we have a wonderful panel this morning of artists and educators and cultural workers who've been long among those who have been at the forefront of this country's social and racial justice efforts. This panel will discuss the important roles of education and the arts in imagining and creating a more just future. And I am delighted to introduce our first speaker of the morning, Dr. Elka Stevens. And I will introduce the panel as they present. And if you wouldn't mind holding your questions and putting them in the chat. And I think it's best if we collectively handle the questions either after each speaker or for a round robin as we discuss this wonderful topic and so important topic for not only today, but definitely for the future of our country. So Dr. Stevens, I'll give a brief intro for you. She's an associate professor of visual culture and studio art in the Department of Art here at Howard University. She also serves as the coordinator of the fashion design concentration in the Department of Art. She is a scholar designer. She uses textiles and clothing as a lens to analyze and as a form of inspiration and media for her creative production. She also is a researcher, and her research interest lies at the intersection of visual and material culture, international trade and identity, digital humanities and design. She teaches courses in fashion design, textiles, international trade, Black visual culture, consumer behavior, and entrepreneurship. She brings 2 decades of teaching experience, although she doesn't look like that, as you can tell. She has careers in retail and media and the related industry experiences. So Dr. Stevens, we look forward to hearing you discuss and present your thoughts on this wonderful and very, very important topic.
So I thought that I would draw upon one of the larger discussions about teaching art and fashion and let my comments revolve briefly around this notion of artist scholar, artist designer, and his or her role in higher education. Then I'll take a break and make a shift, and I'll take a much more practical approach, and I'll begin to talk about the field of visual and material culture and share some knowledge about fashion broadly defined and how it can be utilized to address issues around social and racial justice. So thank you once again. Well, first of all, I identify as an artist scholar. An artist scholar plays an important role to cultivate and inform citizenry, to foster civil discourse, and to encourage the free exchange of ideas within the academy and in academic settings outside of individual institutions of higher learning. To do so, the artist scholar must be actively engaged in practice as well as research. The artist scholar must not only be engaged in the creation of his or her own artworks, but also in the critique, analysis, and just thoughtfulness about his or her art and the artwork of others in its various stages and forms. As a practitioner, as well as a teacher, he or she must be responsible for the training of students in various technical, aesthetic, and professional aspects of cultural production, also of critique, and also of analysis. The artist scholar must also instruct students on the finer points of research, while as a visionary or maker, cultural critic, and even instructor, he or she is also responsible for the socialization of viewers, patrons, as well as participants who are going to engage with or consume the creative productions or artifacts at some level. It is incumbent upon the artist scholar also to present a foundation for inquiry in the arts while redefining approaches to research and practice across academic disciplines and settings. Situating art and fashion in the study of visual and material culture also allows us to encompass the breadth and depth of the subject matter area. We don't necessarily have to train students In the 10,000-hour expert orientation, even though if one works 20 hours a week and engages in deliberate and perfect practice, obviously his or her skills will improve. Perhaps we should consider an aerial view of a few hundred or few thousand feet to put things in perspective. Using fashion as an example, thinking about the design, the production, the evaluation, the acquisition, the marketing, the distribution, the selling, the consumption, the conservation and recycling of textiles and clothing, accessories and home furnishings, domestically and globally, will serve as a point of departure in thinking about this broad area. This is what I mean when I think about the ideas around breadth and depth. The visual and verbal representations of fashions, speaking in terms of image and text, should be of concern to students along with its processes as well as the conditions that impact them, even the ones that they create. Conceptually, the fashion allows us to think critically about and to dialogue about our experiences historically, contemporaneously, as well as futuristically. We just have to identify the point in time with which we are concerned. Now, fashion itself as an area of study is a multidisciplinary and multidimensional area of study that dichotomously and simultaneously operates in both the practical and theoretical, the Hestian and Hermian, the natural and artificial, the mechanical and organic, the visual and the verbal, the tactile and imagined, and the aesthetic and functional domains. Each condition potentially impacts all people in all walks of life without respect to race, creed, class, gender, age, education, occupation, place, and time. We have to frame the study and the production of art in general and fashion more specifically as ways of knowing and experiencing the world in which we live. Students have to understand that. Fashion is an outward manifestation of our visual expressions of our values, our ethics, and our aesthetics. Consequently, fashion is rhetoric or a medium of expression. It is a language with its own coded signs and symbols and syntax, understood only by those who are familiar with it. At this point, we can have discussions around semiotics as well. The discipline consists of a body of knowledge that is replete with theories, narrative, hypotheses, and experiences that can be scientific, phenomenological, or hermeneutical. Fashion research relies upon quantitative, qualitative, and multimodal methodological techniques for creating, accessing, and documenting knowledge that adds value and expands our understanding. In the end, fashion is just a dominant vehicle by which people understand themselves as well as others and make sense of a racialized world or realities in which they live. It is the obligation of the artist scholar to communicate this to its audience or to his or her audience. So utilizing a global aesthetic, a cultural, economic, geographic, historic, political, scientific, social, psychological, and technological frames of reference, we can look to the artist scholar to teach his or her students to place an emphasis on and to use the context of fashion goods and services to provide a platform for thoughtful critical analysis for this global phenomena that engages Black and brown bodies for inspiration and production, while concurrently disadvantaging these bodies through commodification process as well as the lack of attribution. It is only with an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary approach that the artist scholar can guide students to develop theoretical and experimental competencies, as well as a critical view for personal growth and student success of each student. My parents would say that means I have to be twice as good to get half as far. In the end, the artist scholar has to arm students with the tools, not just to fight, but also to get back up when they're knocked down. Multiple ways of knowing provide flexibility, resiliency, and elasticity in one's toolbox, so to speak. So now in laying the groundwork, theoretical groundwork, I want to shift gears and talk a little bit more specifically and turn to some imagery that intersects issues around social justice and demonstrates our ways of knowing and experiencing. As an artist scholar, I always want to provide my students with context. Of course, I'm going to use fashion and use dress as a point of departure here. I've chosen dress not simply because it's part of fashion, but also because it is an art form with which we are all familiar. We all have experience engaging with this process of dress. To date, for the sake of consistency and clarity, let me just provide a little bit more information about dress before I jump to the imagery. So dress, I'm defining, is or consists of a collection of curated and designed products, as well as selected services and practices that individuals and groups use on a daily basis, even now during COVID. Dress requires us acting on some deliberate choices with intentionality to do basically one of four things. So when we talk about dress, we talk about dress in terms of for the sake of beauty or for aesthetic purposes. We talk about dress in terms for the purpose of attracting others. Some would argue this is for the sake of procreation. We also think about dress in forms of ways in which it can protect individuals and groups. And we talk about protection in terms of spiritual as well as physical protection. And we also think about dress in one of its most important ways and how it intersects with today's talk in terms of identity and communication. Dress is a form of communication. It is a language all of its own. And we communicate information through a dress in terms of our race, our class, our gender. We talk about other demographics such as marital status, occupation, education, number of children, and family size. We can also include political affiliation, religious affiliation, nationality, disability, social class, and income in this discussion. We can add mores and values, group membership, our likes and dislikes, as well as our opinions. All of the aforementioned are indicators of status and can serve as currency within any given environment. I will start there. How am I for time, Dr. Everett? Can't hear you.
2 more minutes.
All right. So very quickly, what I want to do is I'm going to share my screen right quick, and I'm going to share a few images with you. If I can do that. There we go. And go to. So where I want to start is looking at going just back about 100, just over 100 years. I want to talk about these visual cues that we can draw upon dress that can begin to talk about and share information about one's identity, but also about how dress is used to begin to communicate issues around racial and social justice. So we can go back to the early 1900s, around 1908, and we can talk about women's social and political movements, particularly in the UK, who adopted colors of purple, white, and green, purple symbolizing dignity, whiteness for purity, and green for hope. We have banners that were used to celebrate and to promote suffrage. And these were quickly adopted in the United States as well. We also see, once again, women using the color of white overall, in addition to the banners, to promote a unified stand to ensure or to ask for the right to vote. We see this later in 1913 in Washington, D.C., when even Wells Barnett is marching, banners in the same colors, similar structure a little bit later in the year where it's a little bit cooler as well. You have other messaging that becomes important as well as we think about suffrage. And all of these things are extending ideas around art and identity and repurposing and examples of a maker movement. We have zoot suits as well that became an act of defiance, even though initially they were introduced as a part of entertainment platforms. Here's Cab Calloway And later we see an actor. And it was thought that zoot suits being worn during a time of war because they required so much material were an act of protest. And one of the things that were considered to be patriotic, but all of this is just being shared with individuals based upon what they were wearing and when and how it was perceived. Even putting on your Sunday best to march for civil rights was something that was considered to be an issue around social justice and racial justice as well. The Black Power movement, the Black Panthers had an iconic look. And as we begin to offer analysis about their look, we see the importance of being in Black and being well kept and having that beret. I just read an article yesterday in The Guardian that talked about the beret was making a comeback. Even something such as a style of chair that we see Huey sitting in became a demonstration of protest, and even the frames in which Malcolm X wore have since taken on an iconic status. The Black Power fist as well, and we see that being raised, and we see that manifesting itself in other areas. Angela Davis's afro, Cicely Tyson's cornrows, Pam Grier's afro, Jesse Jackson's afro are all things that fall under the rubric of dress and fashion that begin to symbolize ideas around racial and social justice. Kente cloth going back to 1957 when the president of Ghana came to the UN draped in his national cloth. Then in Ghana, the Kente cloth. And we see Kente that's being used by graduates, ministers, and other people in society, as well as members of Congress, most recently. We have pussy hats that were being made and part of the maker construct over the, when women wanted to protest earlier in Washington, D.C. Also, we have young women who are celebrating their quinceañeras who've gone to the state capitol in Texas that are using their dress and their gowns to bring attention to immigration. We have actors and other celebrities who are making color conscious decisions, who are utilizing color, particularly the color Black in this case, to protest in the Me Too and Time's Up movements. We have imagery from Black Lives Matter movements. And we have Colin Kaepernick in something that is akin to a Black Panther look with Afro. We have things such as Dashiki, as well as McKesson in his blue jacket, which we know was sold throughout the country as a mark of Black Lives Matter and protest related. The T-shirt is one of the most common forms of protest, but it's not the only one, as you can see, as we're giving you examples of historical examples. The idea of pantsuits, particularly white pantsuits in the political arena, also likened back to women's suffrage movements in their color, but even just the idea of wearing pants for women has been considered an act of injustice and violating social norms in previous epochs of time. We can't have a discussion about the manner in which one dresses without talking about the Make America Great Again hat, as well as other paraphernalia that's going to promote political candidates. And we also recently have to acknowledge this injustice and the collars of dissent, as well as collars that are used for decision-making from our former Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Face masks in this environment become important as well. And now you can get a face mask with just about anything on it. But we have a world-class tennis player, Osaka, who has taken the names of victims of policing and has chosen to promote them at this time using even face masks. I'll end here in just bringing this back to home, since we are at Howard University. Even the presence or even the intentionality of wearing a Howard shirt is a way also that we're using clothing and dress to report or to support protests and issues around racial justice. The notion of inclusion becomes very important, even at the level of Howard University, and just wearing, again, going back to that t-shirt. Now, there are a lot of things that I could have mentioned. I didn't talk about leather jackets of the 50s. I didn't talk about Doc Martens. I didn't talk about hijabs and mandatory burqas in Afghanistan. I didn't talk about colored ribbon campaigns, but there's some takeaways here. We know that the fight for social and racial justice is not new. We know that history is replete with examples of individuals and groups who use dress in a particular way to express their discontent, their frustration, their anger, their hope, their joy, their pride. And all of the products that are featured are products of human labor, many of whom are created by artisans and makers, hobbyists and designers, and even some students. But nonetheless, each of them had an intention, the wearer as well as the creator, the wearer had an intention to create or address social and racial justice or injustice issues. Other products may have not originally had that intention at the time they were made. Nonetheless, they serve as communicative devices by the wearer. So with the revitalization of the creative economy and maker movements, the artist scholar is uniquely situated to educate and provide the next generations about best practices in cultural production while learning about new modes of making technologies. The artist scholar can help students and one another to create art and fashion and art that is used on fashion, which can serve as a vehicle for messaging of all types, including protest. We do so, or while we do so, we hope to understand our students and help them to understand how others who've come before have used materials and resources available to them to communicate their expressions. It is incumbent that we must train students to create their own messages and to take ownership of their cultural productions by investing in themselves, their community, our nation, as well as our culture. Art, fashion, dress is just one of those many avenues. So in the few moments I've had today, in conclusion, I hope you've been able to think critically about dress, theoretically and practically, and relate your own experiences historically, contemporaneously, as well as futuristically, and consider the role of dress in social and racial justice, as well as the role of the artist scholar in preparing students with different frames of reference to contextualize dress and how to engage with it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stevens, for not only that overview in terms of the historical context, but how you were expertly able to weave Howard's imagery and t-shirt wearing as a standard bearer of not only dress and protests, but how relevant it is during homecoming week, which we wish we could show off our t-shirts. But thank you. But I'd like to ask our panelists, I know everyone is eager to share a lot, but we only have a few minutes for our panel. We don't have all day. So I'd like us to be a little bit tighter with our time so that there is an opportunity for question and answer and for dialogue among the panelists as we move forward. So I'm saying that to tease you up, Professor Anderson, that time-wise, I think we were really between 7 and 10 minutes. So if we can stay within that, I'll give a brief intro for you. Akili Ron Anderson is a Washingtonian, born and bred and educated in DC. He has successfully practiced as a visual artist since the 1970s. He is a designer. He fabricates and installs in stained glass windows, sculptural forms, fine art paintings, and theater sets. He's also well-versed in photography and cinematography and computer graphics and special effects and multimedia. He was the first chairperson of the Visual Arts Department at Duke Ellington School of the Arts, co-founder of the Nation House organization, Watutu School, and a board member of African Freedom Fund Treasury and Black Arts DC. He teaches in the Department of Art at Howard. And what he did not include in his bio is that he's also a member of AfriCobra, one of the longstanding art collectives and artist groups who not only formed out of protests, but have been part of this art social protest movement for many years. So Dr. Anderson or Professor Anderson, if you'd give us just in about 7 minutes, your view of how important the role of artists are in social and racial justice. Unmute.
How about that? How's that? Is that good sound? Okay. So I just want to say, Dr. Stevens, I enjoyed your, that's the only problem I have with these kind of situations is that I get all wrapped up in everybody's presentation. And what I mean is I get inspired in the midst of what we're saying. So this collective expression is one of the biggest points that we have to make and understand as we go forward, because we have to always, and Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael used to say, just organize, organize, organize. As a student, he came to Howard University, as you mentioned, as undergraduates at Howard in the then College of Fine Arts, which is soon to be reinstated, I understand from the president, as a matter of fact, that we have the music art department and theater arts department. And then we have the associated, groups, the concert band and so forth, that represent our culture excellently. And we decided to go beyond our specific floors to investigate. Now, what I do every semester while we are in the building, we're not in the building now, is to take a tour with my students because they don't, a lot of times, get away from their particular area to just see faces and operations and so forth. So that when they see each other on campus or at a party or whatever, that they can consider organizing, okay, which is what we did as a group. We protested, yes, we did. As a matter of fact, I was prosecuted and I had to sign a document that I wouldn't participate in any more building takeovers, otherwise I would be prosecuted and possibly put in jail. That scared the hell out of me, and I don't want to say that it didn't affect me emotionally, but I did leave Howard after that, and then continue to organize with these same people, the same high-end group of underclassmen who were concerned about everything. And now, as I reflect on that, and I'm looking at the effect that Emmett Till to George Floyd has affected me emotionally. I mean, living that history, it is encouraging me, even at 74, to continue to organize with artists. I misread the document that said imagining in the title, and I said it looked like it said imaging, and I think that's appropriate that we look at both of those terms, because to imagine a work of art is to say for artists to create it, to create that imagination in a form that is inspirational. So the other thing I want to hit on, quite frankly, is that is cycles. That's a big thing of mine right through here in my life, and I have identified for myself, at least personally, that 50, around 50, plus or minus 5 years, let's say, is a good idea of a contemporary social cycle. And so again, as I said, looking back to Emmett Till and all the people before him, all the people in between him and George Floyd, and the recent people that we are learning new names for, it's clear that that was murder. But what is also clear is that the emotional damage that is not chronicled by going to a funeral, let's say. And what I am concerned with is how we save our lives through art. What does art do to contribute to our mental wellness? What does art do to contribute to us building a nation? Now, I'm not going to go into my talk about nation and country, but a nation is not necessarily a country, but usually a nation of people do exist in a country or a land mass. And so what we have to understand is that we have to be nation builders. And everybody else talks about that, celebrations. I don't know, we doing this thing now with Columbus Day, and it should be that, or that it should be, they can have Columbus Day, but Native Americans need their day or their year or their land back, really. I won't go into that because I sound kind of radical and so forth. But nation building means to celebrate your culture. Okay, and we sometimes want to say, well, let's go for integration, and that's fine if you choose that. But what if you don't choose that? What if you see through your life cycle, and I'm talking about mine, that it's not working? It hasn't worked for me. And so what then do I do? Well, like other nations or other countries, they have diplomats and they have sharing economic agreements and so forth. So what I'm saying to you is not a separatist point of view. I'm just saying, what does our nation have? And what are we doing with what we have? Specifically, staying on the point, is about what do artists do, or people who chronicle artists or chronicle, the art expression. And just back to fashion, I mean, all of us make a fashion statement each and every day, unless you stay home naked. Okay, and so you are deciding on what you look like as you go out to society.
That's a statement too, Professor Anderson.
I beg your pardon?
That's a statement too.
Oh, that's exactly what I'm saying. I thought you were going to say I'm out of time, but you give me a 1 minute notice. And so it's just so important for us to embolden ourselves with our expressions. Okay, be it dress, be it what we have on the wall. And I'm looking into everybody's environment. If you let me see it, I don't know if it's virtual or not, but in any event, it should be, as you examine your home, this is anybody, talking to anybody participating in this, does your home, and if you're a Black person, you person of African descent, when somebody walks in your house, does it say you? Does it say your culture? I mean, it's something in there that celebrates you, your history, and certainly we have our, as a matter of fact, right in back of me, I'm not trying to exhibit this, but I'm working on a portrait of my father. And I've promised myself for years and years. And so in my class, I do demonstrations. And so I say, well, we're doing portraiture. And so, wow, I was getting ready to do myself, right? But I said, my father, I had to do, and I've done my mother, and 1 minute left. Okay, I see that. And so the cycles, what I'm saying to you, if it is a 50-year cycle, then what have I learned? What am I going to invest in myself? I don't think I have 50 years left. I'm sorry for myself. You're sorry for me. But that's the matter of fact. Is that at 70 or so, I mean, please. So what conclusions do I make? I say that we are a nation. We are a nation of people of African descent. And we have to organize around that and celebrate ourselves to embolden our spirit through the arts. And I'm going to sort of wrap it up like that. How's that? Does that work, Gwen?
No, thank you. Thank you, Professor Anderson, for framing our discussion along the lines of, again, this idea that takes us outside of individual purpose, but nation building, which is very much a part of your background and how you see things. And in fact, that brings us to our next presenter, who is very much interested and involved in building and community building and strategic building. Alison McNeil of McNeil Creative Enterprises is nationally recognized as an award-winning strategic thinker and creative entrepreneur. She has 20 years of experience in performing arts and education. She leads with the intention of creating resources, removing roadblocks, and designing roadmaps to make arts and culture accessible to all. with technical expertise in nonprofit management, grant making, assessment, and program evaluation. She's led multi-million-dollar change efforts that have directly informed policy, grant making, and strategic partnerships. Her efforts have also fortified leadership and secured grants that expand equity and access for women, emerging leaders, and communities of color. Every effort that she's contributed to is in service to the communities that she serves, including launching McNeil Creative Enterprises and co-founding Third Eye Cultural Collaborative, Women of Color in the Arts, and the Maynard Biggers Artists Fund. So Alison, McNeil, we're so happy to have you. I did a little background reading about you, and I see that you're from our other HU. So, but we're so glad that you agreed to be on the panel today and talk about how important it is to think strategically, but also collaboratively in community building. So thank you for sharing with us today.
Absolutely. I am so excited to be here for several reasons. One, because I'm representing the illustrious Hampton University as I am in the space with many Howard people, but it is a full circle for experience for me because I grew up on Howard University's campus, born in DC, raised in Maryland, and grew up in the fine arts department in performing arts troops with Kelsey Colley, and I don't know if you guys know Professor Edmonds, and just, you know, my connection and introduction to the arts was centered and cemented at Howard University. So I am one of these unicorns that recognize the power in HBCUs, and my interest in the arts was cemented at the illustrious Howard University. And in fact, I was placed in the arts programming theater summer camps because my parents thought I was shy, and they were like, just let's put her in an arts camp. Little did they know that this introduction to fine arts through Howard University faculty members and staff and students in the 80s would literally change the way I think about who I am in this world. And one of the things I noticed first is that art, you don't choose the arts chooses you. And how you leverage that choice manifests in so many different ways. I started out my career as a performing artist and realized I don't really want to perform on stage, but there's something that happens in that creative process that I want to be a part of continuing. And I found my work working behind the scenes to help shepherd resources and mobilize experiences and amplify the voices of those that were not receiving the funding. Quite frankly, I ended up so I was working behind the scenes in the arts, and I found that a lot of the justice efforts that I support are directly related to supporting the artists that I met at Howard University and supporting the artists that I've known since I've left working as professional artists, those that are using fashion as a form of expression, those that are painting and performing. My primary background is in performing arts administration, but what I end up doing, which is why some people ask me, how do you self-identify? I identify as a strategist because I believe the power of the strategy helps to move, helps to highlight what is happening, create change, and move resources in a way that's just and equitable. So a lot of the work that I do, and I bring this into this space on purpose, is because I believe that artists possess the ability to see what's happening in the future and to lead by example, because by nature of the way arts works, there's collaborative activity, there is expression, it ends up servicing a variety of vehicles: art as a form of healing, art as a form of entertainment, art as a form of mobilizing for social justice. And so my work is literally about how do we get resources to the people that are doing the work, the artists that are doing the work? How do we tell the stories of those that are leading the way through their art that need additional resources to do it successfully? How do we support our organizations? When I say our, I mean Black arts organizations and Black artists, in reflecting on how their work is creating change and impact in our communities. Oftentimes, I can say this as an artist, I was dancer and singer, we create with varied intentions and we do it naturally. So oftentimes what happens because we create is not documented. And a lot of times grant makers and people that are moving financial resources are like, well, what's happened because you've done your work? So I believe in my mind, as a strategist and a change agent, it's the work of supporting artists that are leading the future and making sure that they're well resourced while addressing the systemic racism and inequities that exist in our philanthropic system that make it difficult for Black artists and Black arts organizations to thrive. So it is literally, how do we get the resources in the hands of the people that are doing the work? How do we create a space for philanthropic spaces that fund artists to right their wrongs, to recognize the barriers that they create in their funding practices, in their in the way that they think about what is valuable, what is fundable, and things like that. So a lot of times I end up working with grant makers that are trying to roll out programs to be just, and then they want to assess how well it's happening. And it, I bring, because of my training at Howard with the faculty and Hampton, Hampton and Howard, and my parents, quite frankly, I bring a lens of, let's unpack what it is that we're really trying to do and how are we getting it done. And I often bring in James Baldwin's quote, nothing can be changed unless it's faced, and nothing can be faced unless it's changed. And so we talk about what is required for real change movements. Who needs to be at the table? I consider myself, if we're thinking about social change movements, there's an agitator, there's a storyteller, everyone serves in different roles. A lot of times my role is a lovingly agitator, a disruptor of systems. How do we disrupt the systems that make it difficult for artists to lead the way into the future, or to create partnerships where artists partner with health agencies or education or medicine. I guess that's health, but different sorts of partnerships that make it possible for artists to work in the format that they naturally work in, to support and lead other change efforts in the nation. And so I've been blessed to be able to support this field, the performing arts administration field, in a variety of ways, helping to place talent that looks like everyone on this call in organizations, but not just place them so that they can suffocate under the white gaze, but like help organizations think about what does it look like to welcome diverse voices and the power and the value of having voices that represent a variety of experiences, because we're only better with a variety of ways of thinking about things. But then also assessment and evaluation. How do we document our stories? I heard Dr. Stevens talking a little bit about quantitative and qualitative, qualitative and quantitative data. It is literally, how do we translate what we do naturally into ways to think about how to share our stories with communities that already know what we're doing and communities that don't know what we're doing, so that they can be a part of the mobilization. One of the things that I know is that every artist I know has taken on, like I said, you become it's not something you choose, it is something that chooses you. And my role in the way that I think about justice for artists, and specifically how arts can be accessible to all, is removing the barriers that make it difficult for artists to thrive. So when I was asked to participate in this conversation, I wasn't sure, how the work that I do aligns with the work that was going to be described, but now it's starting to come together because we're talking about the varied ways that we contribute to social change movements and creating just society. So thank you for your time, and I'm happy to be here. Oh, you're on mute. I'll put my.
I do it all the time. But thank you so much for, again, moving the conversation in this way where Dr. Stevens gave us this view, this very, kind of overview of how art really becomes performative in terms of dress. Professor Anderson, in terms of how artists as collectives and change makers and leading us to, say, nation building. Alison, you're allowing us now to think more broadly in terms of change agents and resources and strategic thinking, which brings us to our next speaker, Cori Bush, who is really helping us to see this from not only the point of view of an individual, but how an individual really can change a community and hopefully change a nation as well. Ms. Bush is the Democratic nominee for Missouri's 1st Congressional District, defeating 10-term incumbent Lacey Clay in the primary election, ending a 22-year family dynasty. She's a giant slayer. She's a registered nurse, single mother, ordained pastor. Following the murder of Mike Brown in St. Louis by police officer, she became a civil rights activist, fighting for justice for Black lives on the streets of Ferguson and across the country. If elected, let's say when elected in November, she will become the first Black Congresswoman from the state of Missouri and the first woman to represent Missouri's 1st Congressional District. We're so delighted to have you with us, Ms. Bush, and we're looking forward to hearing how you will continue this conversation about race and justice and arts and education.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Dr. Everett. I'm so thankful to be here. Thank you for having me. Again, I am Cori Bush. I'm the U.S. House Democratic nominee for Missouri's 1st Congressional District. I'm also a registered nurse, as Dr. Everett said. I'm an activist by heart, a mother, a single mother, 24/7. We toppled a 52-year dynasty. I'm put the dynasty. I'm put the 50 in there. It's 52 years. It was 32 years the father held the seat, and 20 years the son. But I have to tell you, it was my father's dream that I would attend Howard University. And though that's not where my path led me, it's wonderful to be here with you right now. Back then, I could not have imagined sitting here today as a candidate for U.S. Congress. But I think that that's important. It's important to have regular people like me, someone whose lifelong dream was to become a nurse, running for office. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Nurses, teachers, social workers, artists, and activists belong in Congress. We are needed there. Why? Because we have arrived at this moment in history thanks to a few powerful yet narrow-minded people who have hoarded power. That's why those of us who dedicate our lives to working with others, caring for others, inspiring others, need to be seated in political office across the land. And let me say this, it is so exciting to be among the incredible Black women speaking with you today, and me. It is so important to me to lift up Black women in everything that I do. And I have to shout out my friend, Dr. Stephanie Rose Spalding, for introducing me to Dr. Latoya Barham while I was visiting DC recently. It can be daunting entering into spaces as a Black woman because you stand out. And it was great to be able to share my experiences with her and those that were at the table that day, and just to feel seen in a different way. So, running for Congress as a Black woman is not easy. Nothing about this work is easy. A lot of people thought that I was out of my mind to run, especially for this seat, a Black woman running against an incumbent Black man. They called me a traitor. Well, most of the time people cared more about my clothing. Don't wear dresses, wear pantsuits, they said. My body, they said my hips are too big to run for Congress. They talked about my hair, my braids are too unprofessional. They talked about my education or my socioeconomic status. They talked about that more than anything else. But I wake up every day knowing that this work isn't about me. I can never lose sight of who I am fighting for. If you know anything about me, then you know that I am here right now because of Mike Brown Jr. But what you may not know is that I had only participated in commemorative protest actions until the first day I went out to protest for Mike Brown in 2014. On that day, I remember it was a busy day. I had church, work, I was taking care of my kids, but I kept noticing this picture popping up on my social media feed throughout the day. I remember when I sat down for dinner, I finally looked at the picture and it was like, wait a minute, what exactly am I looking at? This happened where? Like, I remember thinking to myself those thoughts, and I was mortified. I was heartbroken. I lived 6 minutes away from where Mike Brown laid on the ground for 4.5 hours with the community watching him uncovered. I knew immediately that I had to show up. I was working as a full-time registered nurse, managing a local community mental health clinic. My employer sent me to the apartment complex where Mike Brown was murdered to serve as a triage nurse and to assist with grief and trauma work. I was in disbelief with what I saw. Thousands of people were on the street. The police were dressed like they were ready to head into battle overseas. The police had dogs barking at protesters, at us, at people, just like what you see in civil rights footage, civil rights movement footage from the 60s. But all of this was happening now, right in my neighborhood, where my hair salon was on one side of the street and my nail salon was on the other side of the street. I didn't know at the time that I would end up coming back to protest for the next 400 days. We were simply compelled to action. So now looking back, I'm grateful that by that time in my life, almost every aspect of who I was had been touched by the legacy of Black organizers, from the Black Panther Party's advocacy on community safety, free breakfast programs, and K through 12 education for all children, to MLK's fight for a living wage and universal basic income, which we still need now, to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committees, Freedom Rides, and Black voter registration drives. These organizations and organizers were already built into my very core. Each of those historic leaders had a vision for justice and healing and a better world. They didn't always have the same vision, of course. In fact, they often had very different ideas for the future, but their ideas were driven by a heart for the community, and that's what we need today. We need folks who don't mind being unpopular as long as their community's needs are met. We have to stand up to adversity that says, well, you can't do this. It will never happen. You don't have the right name, the right title. It's not worth it. It's not your time. We need stick and stay tenacity and vigor. We need organizers and galvanizers. We need good leaders and great listeners. We need compassion and strength, effectiveness and accessibility. So when I declare that we as a country must defund the police, ending militarized police departments and reallocating those dollars to community programs, to mental health services, to education, to substance use services, job training, to housing. It's an unpopular idea, yes, but it's necessary for our liberation. As a nurse, I'm all about measurable outcomes. So I want my work to be focused on the outcomes I will bring home to my community. I'm not running for Congress for myself. I don't need a big name, fame, or a title. I need change. My community needs change. And we have been waiting for it too long. We've been waiting for it to show up for far too long. And I'm running for Congress to be that change. And so many other people, I'm asking to do the same. As Black folks, we have been fighting for our lives on a daily basis ever since we were forcibly brought to America. That's violence against us. In St. Louis, we've been fighting for our lives against some of the worst segregation in the country. That's violence. We've had to fight to survive under Trump's presidency and through the novel coronavirus that has devastated the Black community more than any other. That's more violence. If more people already had the health care, the livable wages, safe housing, and paid sick leave we need, we would not have been so ill-equipped to navigate COVID-19. The economic and health disparities we face have existed for far too long, with the same people in place who are paid to close those gaps. Well, we the people have decided to lead. We'll advocate, educate, and empower. Take a look. People are ready for a just, equitable, and anti-racist society. It's not just Ferguson anymore. The whole world has taken to the streets for us, for Black lives. We don't know what the future holds yet, but I truly believe that this is our moment to fight for the values we hold, the people we love, and the future we deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bush, for not only providing us with a sense of what motivates you, but what should motivate us as well. And I don't see questions yet, and perhaps this is time to encourage our viewers, if you have questions of the panel, if you would put those in the Q&A. But I'd like to start out by asking our panel, or perhaps not so much of an ask, but as an observation. Most of you have talked on or touched on how healing the arts need to be and can be. We have students who are watching, possibly alumni who are watching, people who probably are feeling the brunt of the pandemic, all of the things that may be touching their lives. We've also seen how the arts have been such a prominent feature in the protest movements. Dr. Stevens talked about dress, the t-shirts. I'd like to mention the murals, the signs, even the hashtags. People are using the visual arts in innovative ways to talk about, these issues. So if you could just talk a bit about how healing, the positive healing that the arts can bring, as we have a country in need of healing right now. So as our health professional on the panel, Ms. Bush, if you could talk. My mom was a nurse, so I have a real affinity for nurses who really are on the front line every day, pandemic or not. But just again, this idea of how the arts really have the capacity to heal.
So I've seen things change over the last 6 years. I remember when we first hit the streets right after Michael Brown was murdered, how at first it was just, there was just a lot of rage, and it was just a lot of voices, and everything was, nothing was planned or scheduled. Everything was just organic. It was, but I just mostly, I can just picture the scene, and the sounds that I remember were like honking horns and just the street noise and people yelling. And then after a while, that turned over into people started to bring drums out, or they will start to beat on pans and buckets. And so as we were chanting, we were making up chants out there on the street, with the police lineup in front of us with tear gas flying. We're making up chants out there on the street, and the chants were just right back in the face of the police. I remember there's a young man who would make up chants, and those chants are around the world right now. He would literally make up chants as a young guy who still is out on the streets with us now, who he was just banging on a bucket, and he would just make up those chants, and he's not even credited with that, but a lot of those chants came from him. And I remember that in those times when it was so deep, when it was so tense out on the streets and people were hurting that we had that, you know, and we would and so we had that, and then we would have people who would start to dance, and they would have the sage and they would start dancing around, and you know, and that would help us to get through the next that next moment. Because for us, remember, we were on the streets 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for several months. And so that helped us get through through some of those moments. I remember the times when people would bring out big speakers and you would hear "Fight the Power," you know, and so everybody would just like, that would break up some of the pain that we were feeling. Some people who were like bloody on the ground, people who had been brutalized, people who had been arrested, people had that. So it would help us to pull together and try to fight, you know, go on and fight some more. Because let me say, sometimes we were hungry, like we hadn't eaten, we didn't have money. You know, people thought that the Ferguson protesters received money. We didn't get a dime, you know, and so we didn't have money. So we were out there. The hunger was the hunger for our liberation. The hunger was saving Black lives. And so what we had, it was the arts. It was those things that helped heal us, and they helped to remind us why we needed to come back another day. And so in our tears, we had people chanting. In our tears, we had the drums. In our tears, we had the other instruments. People use all kinds of things to make instruments out there on the street, and that helped us to move on. And honestly, it helped us even with our PTSD, because sometimes overhearing the helicopter saved us. Because I don't know if you've ever been, you know, if anybody that's watching this or listening to this, you know, knows what it's like to be around a helicopter when that helicopter is so close and when it's like it's taunting you. But to have the sound of the music to totally push that out. And then not only that, our t-shirts, when you brought up the t-shirts, our t-shirts, we didn't even know it. We were wearing t-shirts because it was hot outside. It was 100 degrees in St. Louis, you know, so it was hot. So we were wearing t-shirts, and we got to the point to where we started putting on, you know, it was like, if we couldn't say anything, our shirt had to say it for us. You know, if we ended up on the ground, beaten by the police, our shirt said where we stood. If we went to the grocery store, you know, in between whatever we were doing, people knew. When we walked in this store, you knew where I stood. There was no question that I was a Ferguson activist. There was, you know, and so people had to know. And then that thing just started going. And so even now, I have on the t-shirt right now. People say, "Oh, girl, you know, that's so unprofessional. You wear t-shirts on panels and blah, blah, blah." But you know what? That's where I came from. I wear a t-shirt when I need to wear a t-shirt. I could wear a suit when I need to. But when I'm making a statement, I could care less about being cute. Sometimes you just have to have a message and put that message out. And so
Except your t-shirt is cute.
Thank you.
You can be cute and make a statement too. So,
yes,
actually, I want to go back to Alison. Have you seen a change in resources, grant making, or community outreach, and how the arts might be used in this fashion? We know historically it has been, but have you seen more innovative ways of collecting or relating arts and social activism through grant making?
You know what I think, thank you for that question, Dr. Everett. What I think is so, the word is not fascinating, because what we know is that the systems are working the way that they were intended to work. But in this moment, so many of, I'll say, grant makers for the arts, the foundations that typically fund the arts, and other state arts, local agencies, and people, individual philanthropists, are overflowing with money. All of a sudden, all this money's coming from all these different places, trying to give it to the people that have historically been under-resourced and disinvested into, almost as an intention to, let's throw money at it. You know, before there were all kind of red tape and hurdles to get money. Now it's like pouring out of the seams, and many, and while it's great in this moment to see the resources shift in some ways, in other ways, the ways that it's happening are the same. I've been on grant funding panels at different regional arts organizations and regional funders and national funders that are going about making the decisions about who gets funding the same way. But then there are other places that are like, you know what? Here is the money. They are putting the money for the first time in the hands of Black arts administrators that can then be trusted to funnel it to the communities that they engage with and in support. I'm thinking right now of a program called the Black Seed, which is funded by the Mellon Foundation, but is intended to support Black theater makers. And so the Mellon Foundation has given and maybe 5 million, along with a few other grant makers, to maybe total $7 million to 3 or 4 Black arts led and for organizations with the intention of them disseminating money to other Black theater organizations. That's never been done. Because usually it'll go to a white organization and maybe they'll partner with the Black person, take the majority of the money, and the Black person will get a little. What my concern, while I am cautiously optimistic about this funding pattern, in philanthropy, historically before 2020, because 2020 has literally changed the game, but like before 2020, philanthropic trends were real, right? So we fund multiculturalism, we fund diversity training programs. Now, money, people, organizations like WOCA, the organization that I co-founded, Women of Color in the Arts, which is a service organization for women that work behind the scenes in the performing arts administration space, are just getting random donations. My question is, and this might be a part of my own trauma, is when does it stop? How long is it gonna stay this way? And what can we do as organizations and individuals that are receiving this now to be sustainable so that when they decide, oh, okay, we did that, because, patterns have shown us that it's a trend thing. How do we keep the momentum going? And so that's a long answer to your question. But yeah, there have been some shifts. And it's exciting to see, like around the country, Ford Foundation is giving different cities, different grant makers in different cities money to disseminate in their communities, CERTA Foundation as well. And oftentimes they're like 3 to 4 year programs. And so I almost want to say, Dr. Everett, check back in with me in 2025
Okay.
to see what has happened, because this trend.
Well, actually, one thing that you pointed out, which is sustainability, I'd like to ask Professor Anderson, Akili, how has it been that the organization AfriCobra, for example, or even Duke Ellington that you helped to found, Nation House, what's the key to sustainability in the arts, or is there a key, or is it just determination, hard work, and that creative enterprise?
Well, I actually have the key. I'm trying to find the door and the lock to open it up. And that's behind the house that we have to build. But I just want to say I'm gonna answer that to Congresswoman Bush that thank you for wearing the purple and white. That's my high school colors. And it takes me back again more than 50 years. And then to Ms. McNeil, I thought about Robert Hooks coming out of the Negro Ensemble Company up in New York, and then coming to Washington, D.C. and starting the D.C. Black Repertoire Theater some 50 years ago. And all I'm saying to the question from Dr. Everett is that, and your statement, is that I've seen this before. I have seen the money flow, like you do a budget and you double the budget because you say they're not gonna give me that much, and then they say, is this enough? And what happened is that we learned to live off of that budget, and when they snatched that budget away, you had to crash. Okay, so the organizations that were mentioned, or Dr. Everett, in terms of AfriCobra and Nation House, and Duke, we decided, well, we don't want your money, and we're going to learn how to do this, how to be business persons, and we just don't want to be blocked. And that's the main thing. Don't block us. Just allow us to do our barbershops and salons and so forth like we already have done, and then let that build, like Madam C.J. Walker and others. I hate to start calling names because then I'll forget or someone's, but we need to learn business. Now, before I came to Howard, I was in business and it was hard, but I was successful after I went through that preliminary stage of what other people do when they start building businesses. Could not get loans, could not get, that kind of grants and so forth. Now, I've been on grants also. And so I know what all of that is. And we have to understand that we have to learn the basics of, I don't want to say survival, but of the establishment of, family businesses and neighborhood businesses, and then we have to learn how to support each other. That's the lesson, because we have been taught not to support each other. We've been taught that, okay? And it's ingrained in us. So we have to just say, okay, I'm going on a diet of lack of self-hate. I'm going on a diet. I'm gonna stop hating myself. I'm gonna start loving myself, which means, oh, that boy messed up. Well, it's still my person. It's still my family. So let's all gather around, get him together, put him in a job, get him to find out what they're. We have to have that kind of family attitude, and it's hard because we have gone through a education of self-hate, and so if we start with that, and the pictures of us looking good, of dressing up, let's go back to that. That's important.
Well, actually, Akili, you bring the conversation then back to Dr. Stevens with
Right.
this effort on the role of, we're all talking about education.
Right.
That's the underlying statement. But Dr. Stevens, you started us out in terms of your role as a teacher and teaching students about how fashion is the statement, whether you intend it to be or not, but it always is. So how do we teach our students, and we only have really about a minute or so left for our panel, but how are you teaching sustainability, self-love, determination, how one really gets involved, like Congresswoman Bush is talking about, how Ms. McNeil says the arts don't necessarily, that we don't select it, that it selects us, that this is a road that we're really on, a journey, whether we like it or not, but how do we teach the students that this journey needs to be sustained, and sustainability comes from within and without, within the community and within the nation. How are you then teaching students how to be on all fronts, perhaps?
Can I just really quickly say, artists are going to create, arts organizations are going to exist, whether there's funding or no funding. Like, that is the nature of who we are. We create because it's within us. We are resilient people. So with the funding, without the funding, all of it, we are going to be here.
That's the truth.
It's just, I don't know how many programs and boards I've sat on where we can't pay people, but they come because they love, they're committed, they're dedicated. In an ideal world, we would foster that and cultivate that so that we can work on our own behalf, so that as these funding trends flow, we don't flow with them. Because the reality is, when you look at the data, Black arts organizations, in the midst of this COVID, we're not as effective because we are used to making ends meet. Like, it's not that it's not devastating. Many arts organizations have closed down, but I just need to say that because that's also a point that gets lost. Like, we're going to be here.
But I think, though, that the point I was trying to make is that we know that.
Yeah.
But our students are often in a more immediate sense that to kind of teach them this road of sustainability,
Yes.
of that it does, it's going to be a long haul.
Mm-hmm.
And this long haul is so much a part of who we are as a culture that, you know, we have sustained. We look back and, you know, part of our whole history is sustainability, you know, innovation, ingenuity, you know, creating. I mean, our whole existence is a creative one. But I wanted to end with Dr. Stevens in the classroom, perhaps, although we all are in a classroom. But is there anything that, you know, because students are our fashion, you know, statements. They move us forward, often, you know, kicking, sometimes, you know, screaming in terms of their sense of style and fashion. They usually are the trendsetters in, you know, making these statements. But how do you help them see this as a long road and not just a short flash?
Well, I think the first and most important part in that is making sure that the students do know the larger context. And by that, understanding that what's happening now, as Akili referenced, is not something that's new. There is a history. Things are happening in cycles. So we have to understand, and I'm sure many of you have heard the adage, what goes around comes around, and then sometimes it comes back around. So with that, we have to make sure as educators that we are sharing with the students that even though, yes, there are some quote unquote new things happening, many of the processes and the systematic nature of the world in which we are experiencing our lives today, this is just on play and repeat. It happens over and over again. I think another key to being able to model, being able to prepare our students has to do with modeling behavior. Very seldomly do you find people who are in these classrooms who are not committed to what's happening every day. And we're looking to our partners in the community to help show students a path moving forward. Because again, this is not new. We're trying to figure out how to represent things for this particular time and place and space. The other thing we have to do, I think we have to show our students how to connect. It's very important that we're engaged with others because through that connection comes affirmation and more importantly becomes knowledge. Because again, we can draw upon our shared history and our shared culture to move forward as well. Finally, I think we have to tell our students to continue. And they have to continue to live. They have to continue to create. They can't give up. They have to continue to reach out. They have to continue to learn. This is not a one-of situation that we're in. We have to imbue the characteristics in our students of continuity, of sustainability, so that they can continue to carry the legacy that have started by generations well before us. And so those are just some ideas about what has to happen in the classroom. And there's a much longer list that we can get into specifics, but for the sake of time, I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much, panel. I can't speak for our viewers, but I can speak for myself to say what a wonderful, wonderful treat for a homecoming that is focusing on advocacy, to be able to talk about the role of the arts, art in terms of education, art in terms of performance and participatory art, studio art, the role of fashion, the role of community involvement and engagement and resources available, activism, and how important it is for one individual and groups of individuals, and how we as a culture and a people have always used the arts in a way to not only uplift, but to promote and to envision a new future. And that, I hope, is where we are headed. Congresswoman Bush, when we see you in Washington, we hope to have you on campus to speak with us and to inspire our students. Our door is always welcome to you, particularly in the Department of Art and the Division of Arts. So please don't be a stranger. We hope to see you often because we're going to name it and claim it. So you're going to win, and we're going to see change in Washington that will be sustainable change. So thank you again, panelists. Thank you for the organizers for allowing us to be part of this historic homecoming week. And thank you to our host moderator, Ms. Relaford. So thank you, and sort of take us out. And thanks again to our panel.